I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: is Finn, the character from the new Star Wars trilogy, is he a good role model for men? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because I've gone to the viewer mailbag and I've received this email from Jared, and Jared says this: hello, love your videos. Thanks, Jared. Since you talk a lot about Star Wars as well as masculinity, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the character of Finn? I'm a 17-year-old guy, and Finn has been a model of what striving for authentic masculinity looks like for me. He was given no guidance in the way of virtue, and when he escapes the First Order, he has no idea what he's doing. But slowly, over the course of The Force Awakens, he begins to take on a truly masculine role, the protector and the guardian, learning to direct his skills as a soldier and his strength as a man to protect a woman, and through her, the whole galaxy. Maz Kanata tells him at one point, "Rey and BB-8, they need you, now go." And from then on, he drops his anxiety and becomes a man in the best sense of the word, breaking into the place he fears the most, dueling with Kylo Ren, who is beyond his strength capabilities, etc., etc. As a teenager striving to be a better man, that's been inspiring to me since I was 14 and saw The Force Awakens in theatres, and I've always tried to follow Finn's example and really strive to be a man through that, because that's what his journey signalled to me. And when The Last Jedi ignored him and used him as a joke, I was frustrated and a little bit hurt. But that's beside the point. I just wanted to know what you thought of him as a character. All the best, Jared. Jared, thanks for your email, and I tend to agree with you. In The Force Awakens, Finn actually is a pretty good model for masculinity for a whole lot of reasons. It's not just the ones you've highlighted. There's also that aspect of courage, and there's a really important teaching point about the virtue of courage here, that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing the right thing regardless of whether you feel fear or not, and very much that's on display in his character. The other thing that's interesting about his character is the whole question of identity, and for a lot of men, that is one of the biggest questions that we sort of struggle with. You know, what does it mean to really be a man and to contribute to this world in some meaningful way? And it's very much connected to this whole sense of identity. Who am I? And for men, this is why tradition is so important to men. And as you get older, you'll discover this more, that your connection to your family and your heritage is actually quite important. And being able to cling to tradition of various kinds is actually quite an important and stabilizing thing for men in our life. It gives us something to anchor ourselves to and then to begin to sort of launch out from as well. And so that's very much part of Finn's story. You think about when he's first discovered, he's nothing more than a number. And when he's given a name by Poe Dameron, he calls him Finn, like we all are, we're given that name. That name gives you a heritage. It gives you a sense of identity and belonging. And that's very much what we see on display with Finn. And it's also, he goes from being nothing more than a piece of utility. So you think about the fact that he's got a serial number. He doesn't have a name. He has a serial number. And what that tells you is that he is not viewed as a person. He has no personhood in his former life. These people have given him a serial number because he is nothing more than a commodity or a product or a tool. He's literally something they use as a weapon, a tool of warfare. And that's how he's viewed. But when he's given that name Finn, he's now a person. There is something profoundly valuable about his life, and there is something inherent in that value that sort of calls to him to do something great with his life. And that's very much, I think, for us as men, and that quest for identity and how do I contribute and what do I contribute to the world. There's lots of that on display in The Force Awakens for Finn as a character. And I agree with you that I think that what they did with him in The Last Jedi was just such a shame, because what they do in The Last Jedi is they take this character, who is one of the two most interesting characters in this new trilogy, and I'll tell you who the other one is in just a second, and then they proceed to use him as nothing more than a plot device so that we can sort of advance the character of Rose Tico. To me, that was a complete waste of Finn and his character arc that had been built up in The Force Awakens, that he then just becomes this sort of very numb and passive plot device, and of course so that he can be taught a few lessons by this new female character they've introduced along the way. Again, it's a sort of an example of how this was, whether you want to call it bad writing or just wasteful, in the sense that there's this really good setup created here, and Rian Johnson just takes it and says, I'll take this really valuable thing and I'll use it as a doormat, you know? And it was just such a shame. Now for me, Finn, as I said, is one of the two most interesting characters in this new trilogy. The other interesting character for me is the character of Kylo Ren. Now, the reason they're the two most interesting characters is because they're the only characters who really have any interesting dramatic tension. They're the only characters who actually have some sort of journey, some sort of arc as a character going on, some sort of drama, some tension, and it makes them interesting. Rey, who is supposed to have those things, just doesn't. She is a Mary Sue. She's just too perfectly written, and for those who might be watching and panicking and saying, oh, you can't say that, it makes you sexist. No, it doesn't make me sexist, it makes me a realist. They're two different things. And unfortunately, that also had a little bit of an impact upon Finn. So in that first film where, you know, for example, when Finn grabs her hand to sort of rescue her from danger, and she pulls back and says, oh, don't take my hand, sort of, I don't need a man to rescue me. And sort of you had all these feminist articles that were written, oh, look at this is amazing. And it's like, no, it doesn't really make any sense, because for a couple of reasons. First of all, for Finn, he would know what the sound of a TIE fighter means more than she would. You know, there's no indication that she understands the real danger they're in. Finn would understand very intimately, because this has been his life. He knows the First Order, and he knows the danger of a TIE fighter and what's coming. So for him to try and rescue her in this way is actually a very heroic thing to do. You don't want to have that interrupted in that moment with someone just going, oh, I don't need you, let my hand go, why are you doing this? You know, I'll save myself. It just distracts from something, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Secondly, surely the whole point, if you are committed to the supposed principles of feminism, which is all about male-female equality, then in actual fact what you want to see is cooperation between male and female characters. You want to see this complementarity between men and women, so the complementary differences that men and women bring to the world. There are strengths that men have that women don't have. There are strengths that women have that men don't have. And what happens is we're complementary in that way. Our strengths and weaknesses complement each other. And so when that cooperation happens, that mutual self-giving love for the other, and that mutual cooperation between male and female characters, you've got, surely that's what the ideal is supposed to be. But this movie doesn't give us that. Instead, it's sort of this dominant sort of Marxist struggle for, you know, who's going to seize the means of production, quote unquote, when it comes to the relationship between males and females. And it actually doesn't make a lot of sense to display it that way. I mean, if you're really committed to doing this well, then surely you do it more subtly. And what you do is you show them actually using their skills to benefit each other in a mutual way. So neither party is allowing the agenda to sort of be a point of domination over the other, or sort of like the central focus of that relationship. Because when that happens, something dysfunctional and very, I would argue, unhuman or inhuman, non-personal is going on. You know, you've reduced your existence to some sort of ideological talking point. But I digress. The point is that has a bearing on Finn, unfortunately, in a way that's not so good. Thankfully, though, there's still enough in the film that Finn is actually an interesting character. Kylo Ren is an interesting character because he's got this drama and this tension going on within him. Unfortunately, he's not handled as well in The Last Jedi either, but I would argue that he's handled better in The Last Jedi still than what Finn was, who's just reduced to a doormat for another character to start to shine instead. So for me, I think you're right. I think you've hit the nail on the head, mate, that in actual fact that Finn had a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And when it comes to this sort of vision for authentic masculinity, there's some really interesting things about him discovering his courage, discovering his calling, discovering the fact that he has an identity that he should cling to, that he should give of himself. And that is something that's definitely worthy of imitating. It's something that I think for us as men that, you know, we should strive to do more of. You know, take that gift of our masculine strength and direct it outwards. Don't take the gift of your masculine strength and turn it in on itself, and then sort of some sort of self-destructive, self-gratifying cycle. That's not good for us as men, and it's not how we leave a good legacy in the world. It's not how we truly find our flourishing and fulfillment. And if we live a life that way, that sort of self-destructive cycle of self-gratification, where we take the gift of our masculine strength and turn it in on ourselves, then what we end up doing is not just destroying our own flourishing, but actually harming a lot of other people in our wake. And one of the reasons why we cause a lot of harm when we do that is because as men, we have that excess of strength, that physical prowess that you know, compared to your average female in our peer group, that they don't have. And so when that thing gets into excess, that can get into all sorts of brutal violence and other things that really destroy other people's lives as well. And or even if it's not violence, it's a failure to commit to fatherhood and to love our kids well, and it leaves a whole, you know, wake of damage behind us. So the idea that you would imitate a guy on screen who is willing to go from being selfish to selfless, who is willing to discover authentic courage, even if he feels fear, to do the right thing, and to take the gift of his masculine strength and to use that as a means of protection for those who are more vulnerable and dependent around him, that is just, to me, is a shining example of what authentic masculinity should look like. And yes, not just you, but all of us should be doing more of that in our lives. And when we do, really good things happen. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.